Let's talk about aviation instructors' professionalism and responsibilities. So, starting off, there are five main responsibilities for aviation instructors. It's going to be helping your students learn, providing adequate instruction, demanding adequate standards and procedures, emphasizing the positive, and ensuring aviation safety at all times. Those are your five main responsibilities as an aviation instructor. So with helping students learn, you just want to make sure that you're always providing an enjoyable experience because that's when learning is most conducive. You're going to also need to be providing adequate instruction. So this means that you have to realize as an instructor there are no two students who are alike, and you need to understand your students as an individual and tailor their learning around them as an individual so that they are able to learn better. Standards of performance. You need to make sure you are holding your students to acceptable standards. That's your responsibility, and then ensuring that they are able to comply with the current practical test standards, which we call the PTS or Airman Certification Standards, which is what most of the practical tests are based off of now. We call that the ACS. Um, it is important, however, to know that the PTS and the ACS are not for teaching. These are actually testing documents. So don't be just going off of what the PTS and the ACS say for your instruction. That's what they're being tested off of. But there's also a lot of other things that they need to know to be well-rounded pilots in the first place. You need to be emphasizing the positive when you are providing instruction. So, kind of like I was talking about earlier with helping them learn, you just need to make it an enjoyable experience, and you need to reinforce that positive image of aviation that most likely got your student into the cockpit in the first place. Um, you need to minimize their frustrations. So, in order to do that, you can help keep them motivated, reinforce uh, things that are going to motivate them, and don't do things that are going to discourage their learning, like yelling at them in the cockpit or doing things that would make them not feel comfortable or safe. So you need to also make sure that you're keeping your students informed because no one likes to be around a situation that they don't know what's going on. They need to be explained to clearly what's expected of them and what you're looking for. So there's no surprises. And again, we need to be approaching these students as individuals because, as I said earlier, no two students are the same. So you have to teach in different ways to different people. Give credit when it's due. So if a student does a really good job, you need to make sure that they know about it and that they understand that they are progressing, and that gives them the motivation to want to keep on coming back as well. Criticize when you're criticizing. Excuse me. Criticize constructively. So if it has nothing to do with the lesson that you're teaching at that time, it probably doesn't need to be said. So just make sure that you are really criticizing them for exactly what's happening right then and what you're talking about there. Be consistent. So if you are really enforcing a crosslink correction on taxi today when it's really gusty outside, you better also be really enforcing that crosslink correction when it's not as windy because you're going to start confusing the students. Or if you're telling them to do one thing and they see you not doing it, then that really just confuses them and makes them think that you're telling them to do these things for no reason. So just keep it consistent. And if you make an error, just admit it because you don't want to lose the confidence that your student has in you as an instructor. And if you're not able to admit your own errors, then it's easy to lose that confidence. Now let's talk about flight instructor responsibilities. So, first off, there are physiological effects to flying that are going to be a lot different than a beginning student may have ever experienced. There's going to be unfamiliar noises, vibrations. You're going to start pulling G's, and you're going to feel how your body reacts to taking G forces, and that could cause upset stomachs. There have been people who have vomited, things like that, and negative sensations that are associated with this are easier to mitigate when they understand the nature of the cause of why they feel this way. Um, ensure your student's skill set. So prior to any solo flight, an instructor has to make sure that the students understand these required skills and are able to apply them by themselves. Um, that as an instructor, you need to be very current on the latest procedures and the latest ways of teaching things because aviation is forever changing. Certification standards are always changing, and you need to be up to date on that because you're a professional in the industry at this point. Professionalism is pretty self-explanatory. You need to always be behaving in a professional manner. Always act with sincerity. Accept the students just as they are. You can't walk into this wanting to change these students. You need to adapt to their learning style. It's easier to change yourself than it is to change the world. Um, under no circumstances whatsoever should you be degrading students ever, no matter how bad the flight was. You always need to give them that level of respect because this is a dangerous environment, and when there is not respect involved, it becomes even more dangerous. As far as personal appearance goes, that ties back into professionalism as a whole. You need to present yourself in a professional way. So, proper grooming, be clean. Maybe it's a good idea to carry gum with you because you're in close proximity in the cockpit and nobody likes bad breath. So, things like that, just proper hygiene, really, basic human things. Your demeanor, how you're acting towards a student says a lot, and it could really affect them in their entire aviation career. If you're the when you step to the plate with teaching a new student, now in most cases you are the know all be all in the aviation industry. Nobody knows more than an aviation student's first instructor who introduced them to flying. That is their first impression, and it's very important that it's a good one. Proper language, just don't use profanity. And finally, evaluation of ability. So, on demonstrated ability, you need to make sure that the students are mastering different elements of it and not just um, the overall procedure. It's broken down into certain elements, and that's important to understand that they need to master the elements, not the big picture. Um, keeping the students informed of their progress is very important. They need to know exactly where they are and how they're progressing. It's going to help you and your student. When you're correcting student errors, you need to be brief and concise and correct their errors right then and there, and let that be the end of it. It's difficult for students to learn to maneuver properly if they don't have the chance to correct an error also. So you want to also let students have errors and try to figure their way out of that because it's going to help them a lot more than you coming to save the day every single time because you're the instructor and you're not always going to be there when they get in a tight space and they need to know how to react. Um, as far as exams, there is the knowledge test and the practical test, and both of which you as a flight instructor have a big part in. So with a knowledge test, you're going to have to give up your endorsement saying that you have trained the applicant in the areas required to pass the test. If they do fail the test, then you're going to have to sign it afterwards after you've provided additional training in the areas that they were deficient in for that test before they're able to take it again. With a practical test, there is an FAA Form 8710-1 that is that's saying that I have trained this applicant and they are ready for their practical test. And once you give that endorsement, then it's valid for 60 days. Professional development. So, as a professional, you're always growing and you need to be continuing your education and keeping up with the latest teaching styles and latest updates when it comes to flying because, as I said earlier, aviation is ever changing. The government is a good source of education for flying. There are tons of free government resources that you can download actually electronically. Any FAA publication, such as the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Airplane Flying Handbook, things like that, you're able to download that all for free, and that's where we get a lot of our knowledge when it comes to learning about aviation. There's different educational training institutions. So, for example, TSTC is a local technical school, and it's a training entity that you're able to learn more about flying at. Commercial organizations. So this could be like if you've ever heard of King Schools, they have online resources to where you can essentially get ready for your knowledge test, and it'll even help prepare you for your practical test from a knowledge standpoint, not practical because you can't really fly through an online course. And then there's industry organizations that will present training opportunities. With sources of material, you as an aviation instructor need to always maintain an updated FAR AIM. That's your federal aviation regulations is the FAR part, and then the AIM is your aeronautical information manual. And then you're always going to want to have the most updated testing standards, so whether that's the PTS or the ACS. And you need to be thoroughly familiar with the current certification and the current requirements. And as I said earlier, the FAA gives you free electronic resources for a lot of these things, but there's also printed materials. You can buy books if you're more of a paper learner and like to turn the page on things, and it gives you the opportunity to write notes where you deem fit. And this concludes my lesson on instructor responsibilities and professionalism.